Hi, everyone. It is 10:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. I am just super excited about today's webinar and to learn from our group of awesome panelists today as well, who are all just really passionate about treating anxiety and OCD. But what I love is their open hearts and their open minds to when any specific tools don't work for the client sitting in front of them, they'll look for other processes that can be effective for that person. And I think that's so key and really ties in with the spirit of TEAM-CBT, which our motto is tools, not schools of therapy. And any school of therapy can be great and beautiful, including TEAM-CBT, but it won't be the answer for every single person who comes to us. And so that's when I think it's important to just have different options that we can turn to really help that person sitting in front of us, because it's truly a privilege when someone comes to us to trust us with their struggles and with their pain. And I think for many of us, we've seen some really powerful healing with ERP. And we've also seen when there are moments when the gold standard doesn't always lead to the answers or the healing that we're looking for that person. So then, actually, thanks to Margaret McCall, one of our panelists, I learned about ICBT and have just really grown to see and appreciate how smart and thorough this treatment approach is. I think the explanation of OCD just makes a lot of sense from the ICBT perspective. I think it's very comprehensive. So I'm just really excited to have our group of panelists share more about a variety of different treatments with a special focus on ICBT with all of you. So let me jump in with a few just technical pointers for the most user-friendly experience for you all. First, if you want to go to the view option on your top right, if it's really distracting for you to see all of the faces, you can just click on speaker view. And if you all can also mute yourself as you come in, that would.
I've got it turned up to 100.
Okay, I can also do that. Okay, so you can watch through speaker view, and then it could be less distracting for all of you. Also, if it's distracting for you for people to type into the chat and it pops up that preview, you could just go to the bottom where it says chat and there's that little caret up. If you click on that, you have the option to unclick that checkbox that says show chat previews. And then those chat boxes won't show up if that feels too distracting for you as you're trying to engage with the answers. And you can still choose to open up the chat when you want to, but just not as people are typing in, so it could be distracting for you. Okay. And then let me begin by introducing some of our awesome panelists here. Okay, and you can just wave when I share about you. So starting off is Dr. Amy Huberman. Amy has really become a dear friend to me throughout our years of just learning TEAM-CBT together. We met at Atlanta at a David Burns intensive, actually. And she currently is one of the few providers in Maryland that will provide TEAM-CBT treatment. But I believe probably the only provider that does it in an intensive setting where it can be up to seeing people up to 2 sessions a day for a week long or 2 weeks long to just really dive in and get the healing work in for them. It's a really unique treatment process and also found to be highly effective. And just so really grateful for Amy for being here, sharing her expertise and time with us. Next, we have Bronwyn. She is a licensed clinical social worker based out of Indiana. And she's one of my inspirations really in learning TEAM-CBT in that Facebook group. And I'll share all of the links with you all if you want to join that group. It's a very generous group of clinicians, and just a lot of the information that she's posted just really gives me a lot of clarity in learning this process. She also has a training coming up that I will be attending myself. So I hope you all, if this starts to really click with you, you can join me in learning from her. It's on December the 9th and 10th, 4 hours each day to really dive into learn ICBT. Because while the manual is great, I haven't been the best at just really trying to read and apply the process. And in-person training has always been the best way for me to learn. I mean, live trainings. So you are welcome to join that. I've sent that in the reminder email, and I'll also send it again after the training for you all to have the link on that. Next is Margaret McCall. She is an LPC based out of Georgia. I give her all the credit for me to actually even know of ICBT and to learn about it, and just so excited that she's here, just super passionate. Really, almost 100% of your practice is with OCD patients, isn't it, Margaret? And then has applied it successfully in treating body dysmorphic disorder as well, which I find to be really challenging. So really excited to learn from her. And just your passion, Margaret, is truly contagious, because I think you just love people, you love seeing healing happen. And it makes you really excited when you find something that truly works for people too. So that's really exciting. And lastly, we have Rich Gallagher here. Just a really awesome, cool guy. Just today I learned that he's pushing 70 and still going, and is here with us in this process to teach us about a whole variety of different treatments for OCD. And I just found out that he's the author of 21 books. The latest one is going to be available on November the 8th. It is called The Anxiety Journal, and it has all of his latest tools that he's found to be really effective in helping clients work through anxiety. And I'll also link that for you all when I send out the feedback form for you to learn more about these awesome treatment tools, and to get to know Rich and his treatment style a little bit better as well. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to jump in and start out with asking a variety of questions to our panelists, and at the end, we'll open it up to everyone as well. Okay, so starting off, I'd just like to know a little bit more from each of our panelists on what got you interested in treating OCD. So you can share your name and then just share with us a little bit more about your heart and passion for this work and what got you interested in it. And I'll just start by calling out each person, so you don't have to awkwardly wait for the other person to go. I'll just switch up the alphabetical order. So I'll just start with Amy, and then next time I'll start with Rich. Amy, would you mind starting off by answering that question for us?
Absolutely. I am a psychiatrist, and in the midst of my psychiatry training, in my third year of residency, we had just a little bit of training on cognitive behavioral therapy. And it was really the only psychotherapy training that we received. There was a big focus on medication. And sort of just like if some of you have heard David Burns say, what he learned to do in residency was just sort of talk, have people talk. That's sort of what I learned in terms of psychotherapy, except for these few weeks of CBT when a psychologist who had a passion for treating OCD came to teach, and under her guidance, I worked with my first patient with OCD using exposure and response prevention, and saw her just get back her life in a pretty dramatic way. And that's when I knew, both this CBT thing is what I want to do, and also when I developed this passion for working with people with OCD. Yeah.
I love that. Isn't that amazing when we can truly see that healing work happen and where it truly impacts their life? It's amazing to see that. So very cool that that was your first experience in getting guidance from a psychologist who was using ERP. Yeah, makes a lot of sense as to why that then just really made you passionate about, I gotta learn more and do more so I can really help people heal in this process. And I know that's your heart as well, Amy, on just caring for people and their healing here. Next, we have Bronwyn. How about you, Bronwyn? What got you passionate about this work and got you interested in treating OCD?
A great question. I am 30 years into my own personal journey with OCD as a lived experience clinician with OCD. So it's been a part of my life for a very long time. And as far as wanting to treat it, I never thought I would ever. Like I thought I would stay very, very far away. And
Wow.
I was a school social worker for a very long time. And then when I decided that I wanted to do something new and go into private practice, I definitely did not think I would pick up OCD as a specialty. I knew I would work with trauma. But I kept seeing people coming in with trauma who also had OCD. And there weren't very many people around to treat OCD. And so I have a lot of empathy. And I was like, well, somebody's got to treat it. Might as well be me. And then to my utter surprise, I totally fell in love with treating it. And I think OCD treatment stuff in the middle of the night, I wake up, like it's just, it has taken over my life in a totally different and much more positive, happy, healing way. And now I can't imagine not treating OCD.
Wow, I love that. Where you very similar to me on, it's like OCD treatment found us. It wasn't what we were seeking out to treat initially. But you really have a gift for it because I think not only your lived experience gives you a lot of compassion for this work, but truly diving into all of the evidence-based approaches allows you to just learn it on a deeper level for your healing and allows you to train and teach it really well too.
Thank you. Yeah,
really
I think
cool.
The fact of having multiple treatments makes it even more exciting, right? Like more tools. Definitely the way to go.
Yeah. What about that made you excited, as I know you're certified in ERP and then learned about ICBT a bit later?
ERP, I did ERP as a person that needed help as well. And it definitely gave me back like the ability to go out and be in my life. But the obsessive doubt part of OCD was alive and well in my brain all the time, even though I could do the response prevention. And there just always seemed to be, there has to be a way to be able to deal with this particular part of OCD for me. And so when ICBT landed in my lap, Margaret got to watch that all live because she and I did ERP training together. And I'm sure she can tell you the excitement that I had of ICBT. I went from still scoring really high on a Y box to being subclinical in a very quick period of time. So having those tools when ERP works, great, it's wonderful. But for me, I needed something else. So having that personal experience of getting to have something else changed my life.
Wow, that's amazing and really moving to hear. And it's just truly incredible to hear when it allows you to reclaim your life and to really change your life while you can live externally with response prevention. It's truly like, sounds like maybe this inner peace,
right?
That it provided you that was really important in treating the obsessive doubt as well. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, and really eager to hear a bit more about your journey here. Next, we have Margaret. How about you, Margaret? What got you interested in this treatment?
Well, kind of like Amy in graduate school, you know, they touch on OCD, but not really. I mean, you just learn it's a diagnosis and kind of how to diagnose what the general population knows. I never really thought I was going to be an OCD specialist. And then I went into private practice. I got my first client, identified the OCD, and I didn't have a clue what to do. So I said at the time, and we had already been working together. So and we had a really good rapport. And I said, I can refer you out. We can find another specialist and we can find somebody. Or I think we could figure this out. Little did I know, I didn't know what I didn't know, but I bought Edna Foa's book and I started to work through she could tell you, I sometimes had the manual in my lap saying, okay, here's what we do next. She got better, but she got better. And 7 years later, I still hear from her every once in a while. And she talks about getting better. But knowing what I know now, she could have gotten so much better. I'm sure she still struggles with things that we didn't even touch on. But over the years, I would see a client here and there, some success, some not so much success. And it wasn't until the pandemic when every other client I saw had OCD. And then I started to realize I don't have a clue. I mean, like so many therapists who don't know what they don't know. And then I decided to specialize or to get training so that I could meet the needs of these clients. I met Bronwyn at the Center and Treatment, the Treatment Study of Anxiety, and did the intensive training, got certified, fell in love with it. I was just meeting a need for a lot of my clients, but then decided to become a specialist. And 100% of my clients currently have OCD. Pretty much, I advertise that anxiety and OCD, but typically I draw in, and I'm the only specialist within a 100-mile radius. So had I looked for somebody to treat this client, I wouldn't have found them anyways. So, and that's how I fell in love with it.
Out of necessity, you were the only option for these people.
Yeah. Yes.
And it mattered to you to not leave them hanging and suffering.
Right. And I guess if I had just, not been so passionate about it, it's so cool to work with somebody. And with ERP, I found this approach that really helped people. People were getting better and they were suffering so much when they walked in the door. And I mean, that feels really good as a therapist to have a tool that you can help people get better and they can reclaim their lives. And I think that's where the passion grew. And I thought, this is what I want to do. And you're right. Like there's nobody else around. I feel compelled.
Yeah. And seeing the results, I think, is then what makes us see, like, wow, let's learn more, let's do more, let's do this better. Because once we started to really see the powerful healing effects of ERP for my clients, mostly with postpartum OCD, it was just like incredible. And seeing the liberation that they can get from that process is really amazing. But you're absolutely right. The more that I've learned about ICBT, the more I think of past people and said, gosh, I wish I just had this additional process to really help them with this other element that they were struggling with.
All the time. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And next we have Rich. Rich, what got you interested in treating OCD and lit your passion for this work?
Hi, Diane. It's an honor to be here. And compared to these great panelists, I'm kind of a mutt, actually. I have an engineering degree, and I was actually one of Cornell University's first dual majors in engineering and psychology. People joke that I would grow up to build bridges that would talk people out of jumping off of them. But back in the 1970s, I actually had lived experience. I suffered from severe agoraphobia, and discovering CBT back then really cured me from that. I went from being very limited to being in a suit on a jet flying off the Boeing aircraft as an engineering supervisor. Really a life-changing experience for me. So I became a therapist later in life after a long technical career, and I've always been a hardcore CBT therapist. I'm a graduate of the OCD Foundation's intensive clinical training. Like Margaret, I was the only therapist for about a 150-mile radius that treated OCD, so I saw people from all over the state. I'm a huge fan of ERP. When it works really, really well. I've actually taught over 100 clinicians in upstate New York how to practice ERP. But really, my big passion is for those people that evidence-based treatment doesn't work for. And I also have lived experience with OCD, and I found that, and I joke, Bronwyn and I are very good friends, and I joke that she's my doppelganger, but I had very similar experiences, and that the ERP got me to a certain point, but for my biggest themes, there's actually a growing body of research that shows that ERP isn't effective for my particular theme of OCD. And so discovering other strategies through emerging literature and seeing that those got me well. As a clinician, I never give up on anybody, and I'm never satisfied to just say, you're a treatment failure or that doesn't work. And sadly, too many people have had that experience when people are too married to one particular theory. So really my passion for these days is to have a smorgasbord of techniques, keep up with emerging literature, and always be open to new ideas for the patient in front of you.
I love that message on just keeping an open heart and open mind. And while I feel like I was wanting to embody that, I just didn't know there were other options. Like all I knew is that ERP is the way to go, the gold standard for treating OCD. And I definitely seen a lot of powerful healing with it, but I've also seen cases where we got stuck and they didn't quite get to move forward. And I felt like I had to go to a space of giving up because I didn't know there were other options. So that's also what's driven me to be really passionate about bringing this webinar together so people can just know about other options and then that there are other tools out there. And I hope you all have looked at Dr. Amy Huberman's chart, where she's really outlined concisely and clearly that there are many other options because everyone's unique. And when one option doesn't work, it's not choosing one tool or the other or clinging to one over the other. It's ERP and ICBT and sometimes RF ERP and ACT and whatever the person in front of me needs, I want to give you the option to make that work.
There's
yes.
a metaphor that I use, which is, if you look at the dictionary definition of heresy is not a false religious belief. It's a true belief taken to extremes. And so my watchword is to never be heretical about the way you do OCD treatment.
Yeah, that needs to be like on a plaque. Never be heretical on how you approach OCD treatment and truly treatment for any of our unique clients sitting in front of us too, right? That's why we have this motto of tools instead of clinging to different schools of therapy, because people are unique and complex and interesting and different. Yeah. Awesome. The next question is, so everyone here has a lot of experience with using ERP, either gotten certified or a lot of intensive training. And I think the majority of our audience has also heard a lot of ERP since it is the gold standard treatment. And so I want to create a lot of space for people to learn about other options. And the question is, in your experience, when you're treating a person and you're getting stuck with some of the traditional approaches of using exposure and response prevention, what has been other strategies or approaches that have worked for you? And if you could also share a little bit more about them with the audience as well. So I'm going to go in reverse now, starting with Rich.
Okay, so I think it really starts with listening to the client in front of you. So, and because as we all know as clinicians, that things don't fall in neat little boxes when you're treating a real human being. So, for example, if a client tells me that she's a sexual abuse survivor and she's working with me because I'm an OCD expert, but she doesn't want a male therapist hovering over her to see how much exposure she's doing, or somebody's been through a life change and they've had a loss in their life. They can't bear the thought of even being a tiny bit more uncomfortable than they are already and don't want to do exposure right now. I'm going to go full Burger King with those people and, work with whatever they need. And that's where the importance of having a palette of strategies comes in. You mentioned a lot of the key ones. I'm a big fan of, for example, titrating ERP so that it's easy and tolerable for people. We'll talk about this later, but I put a lot of focus on response prevention versus exposure. That's an extremely important aspect of doing it well. ACT has been a good tool for people. Inference therapy is tremendously exciting because it's a well-tolerated, clinically proven strategy. It's cognitive rather than experiential, and so it's very easy for people to take on. I personally got well with an approach that was different from all those things based on emerging literature from my own triggers with Disgust, for example. So I think keeping up with the literature, forums like this, and Tyann, we're so grateful that you're having a forum like this to talk about what's new in the field, and being open to the person in front of you. I think those are really the keys.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by titrating ERP?
Absolutely. So the the way that I was trained to do ERP is that you make yourself uncomfortable and then learn to tolerate that discomfort. And when that works, it works really well. It's almost like a magic eraser. Everybody has a level of anxiety that they're willing to choose. And if your fears habituate, in other words, if they go away over time with exposure to them, then that's a tremendous way to work it. However, so many people struggle with getting started with exposure that after I graduated from BTTI, or the IOCDS training, I turned that strategy on its head. My mantra with people is start in your comfort zone, stay in your comfort zone, see where you can take your comfort zone from week to week. And I had tremendous outcomes from that. I actually published a paper at the 2018 IOCDF conference with a retrospective study of my cases. So one trick I use, and this comes straight out of David Burns, by the way, paradoxical intentions. I'll have people do a hierarchy of their fears and then have them choose a level of anxiety that they want to tackle that week. And then I'll say, no, make that easier. I want you to have a win this week. and so they're arguing with me about doing more, which I love. So titrating is meeting the client where they're at in terms of making sure that they're going to be successful in doing the exposure therapy or any other technique that you're trying.
I love that because it sounds very compassionate instead of just forcing someone into flooding. Some people may choose that, and that's great, but this is truly meeting them where they're at. And I love the paradox of what you're sharing, like, okay, you want to be at a 50% anxiety, let's go for a 40 or a 30%. And then they're arguing for change for you. I can do more than that. And I can be in this space where I'm arguing for the higher exposure instead of you forcing me along, right?
Exactly.
It's pretty powerful. I love it. Yes, next we have Margaret.
So the question is what to do when ERP is not working. And when I only had ERP, I would always include ACT and other approaches. And the only two that I'm really trained in, like intensively trained, is ICBT and ERP, but I know ACT. And so we would apply that in response prevention. But since learning ICBT, I don't look at it, what to do when ERP doesn't work. I'm like Rich, and we're like talking about educate the client on all the approaches, or the effective approaches. And I think most people could agree, like the standalone approaches are ERP and ICBT, and the rest are kind of adjunctive to it. So I find that most of my clients want to start with ICBT. And when they look at those options, although, if somebody has a phobia, we're going to go exposure for that. So I don't see it as like what to do when ERP doesn't work. I ask them, what do they want to do? And right now I'm doing a lot of ICBT, and I'm seeing it work. However, I'm happy to go to ERP at that point, or to ACT, and I'll kind of incorporate that in. But I don't see ERP as the front line anymore.
That's a really interesting shift. So I'm hearing then it's giving the client the option to choose. These are the two main approaches, which ones resonate with you. And you're finding that most of your clients are leaning towards ICBT. And with them seeing just a lot of healing in that process, it's then become maybe your frontline approach as well. Am I hearing that right?
And as I was learning ICBT, I got a referral, a client who specifically asked me, do you do anything other than ERP? And I would have said a month prior, not really, because, we could try some things, but the gold standard is ERP, and that's what's really going to work. But luckily, I had just been introduced to ICBT, and I'm like, I'm learning this new approach. If you want to give it a try, she's doing really well. So for some people, they specifically do not want to hear, or they've had it and it just didn't work. So that works.
I'm seeing a couple of comments in the chat. Let us clarify the acronyms here. So ERP is exposure and response prevention, which currently in the literature is seen as the frontline approach and the gold standard treatment for OCD. And ICBT has been around for actually about 15 years. I just think many of us haven't heard about it. Also, an evidence-based approach that's been shown to be equally effective as ERP, actually. and it stands for inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy. You'll also hear it referred to as IBT, inference-based therapy, and it's interchangeable and it's the same thing. It's the CBT part has evolved just so people are more aware that it is a cognitive approach to treating OCD. Margaret, I wanted to follow up on what you were saying. What has it been like for you to be certified in ERP and then to see many of your clients choose ICBT and to see the healing effects of that?
It was really difficult because I was becoming certified in ERP, as you know, we talked. At the same time, I was learning ICBT, and I would often introduce it to my the person who was certifying me, and we had a lot of talks about it. But it was really it was difficult because ICBT resonated with me and with so many people. And I didn't say earlier, I have OCD in my family, so it's a wonder that I never was drawn to it. I guess maybe that's part of the reason why I was drawn to it. But I would just say, when I really struggled learning ICBT with an ERP approach, and I was skeptical and argued with some of the experts in there, and particularly around imaginal exposures, and started to realize that, you know, we can do this without the increasing the anxiety for many people. I don't know if it will be for all people, but it was difficult shifting my brain over to an ICBT perspective while learning ERP and doing ERP. And it was a process. I've now been able to say I could do both. I could do ERP, but there are certain things I would not do in ERP with this new learning that are really not part of the original ERP. Like Amy says in her chart, that certain things are kind of in vogue with ERP right now, and are not really part of the original package or the original treatment approach. And those are things I would leave out if I when I do ERP.
Do you mind clarifying what those specific things are?
Well, specifically extreme exposures and tolerating uncertainty. And I do kind of cringe when I think back on some of the exposures that I've done in the past, and that and it's really, you know, I think we probably could have bypassed that. But you know what you know, right? When you do it.
Yeah. I know it's truly blown my mind that not sitting with uncertainty part, because I'm like, that's all I've been teaching for the past 5 years and such an important integral part of healing OCD. And then it's just really blown my mind in this past year of learning ICBT slowly and floundering through it. But how powerful it is too that, wow, clients can be grounded in certainty about who they are, about what they can see and what they can sense is actually a really powerful and empowering message for the person too.
Well, I would just tell us, I was working with a guy with POCD, and he was struggling, and he was like at 99% certain he wasn't a pedophile. And I said, well, you know, we could shift over to exposure and response prevention because there really is some tolerating that uncertainty. And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to get that certainty. And he did.
Yeah. And in working with like moms who do have POCD, which is pedophilia OCD, when the person is afraid that they could molest children or even their own child, or sexually harm them in some way. And I just thought in learning ERP, we're sitting with, I could possibly do it or I may not, and I'm going to proceed with life anyway. And how powerful it is to actually really get grounded in knowing that actually I can be fairly certain about who I am as a person, and that I am not going to molest my child or to rape my child. That's been a really powerful shift for me in grounding people and truly knowing who you are and who your character is at your core. That's been really a beautiful approach. And I promise we'll share a little bit more about ICBT and breaking it down. Right now, we're just exploring what are the other options when you found yourself being stuck. And I'm hearing maybe there's even a shift of I give it to the client and let them choose and seeing what works for them. Bronwyn and then Amy, either of you have anything to add to that as well?
My thoughts are really similar to Rich and Margaret. I allow my clients to choose as well, and I still give the options that are, evidence-based and out there, but my clients have all chosen ICBT. And this is not surprising to me as someone with lived experience, because there is something about, once we explain what ICBT is here soon, there was a moment for me when I learned what ICBT was, that there was a gut like punch to my body. Like I literally felt like a jolt. That was like, oh my gosh, these people understand. Like there was an understanding of my experience and just the explanation of when I was starting to learn, that made such a deep gut reaction of this is going to be the thing that's going to help me with these fears. So I'm not surprised when my clients choose that. But just today, like I have a client who's doing really well with ICBT, and she has some disgust stuff that she wanted to work on as well, which I'm sure Rich and I will touch on later, is a little bit different. And so we were doing other things outside of ICBT to help her with some disgust. She also decided that she really wanted to push for an exposure on one particular thing that she just really wants to handle. And I was like, great, let's do it. So it's also not just choosing one or the other, it's choosing a mix, whatever your client needs in that moment. But having those tools makes me feel like I'm doing my job.
Yeah. I love what you're saying about the gut punch of, wow, these people get it. Because it then sounds like this sounds really validating.
Yeah.
And
very validating.
Yeah. Yes. And then choosing from a mix, depending on the person that's sitting in front of you. I don't think we can share that message enough. I'd really, after Amy shares, I'd love to hear from those of you who do give your clients options, just to educate the participants today how you explain the difference between the two, so your clients can know more and be able to choose wisely. Amy, how about you? To the other question first of when you have gotten stuck with ERP, what have been the other options that have been effective? Amy, you're muted.
So sorry. Yeah. So first I want to say, I have a very similar approach to Margaret and Bronwyn and Rich in really, offering options up front. And I also like to sort of add in that piece that comes from David Burns about sort of fail as fast as you can. That basically, it may well be that not any one of the options on the menu goes all the way. And so sort of setting people up to expect that, we may draw from multiple different approaches, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's, anything wrong if one method doesn't address all of the OCD or all of the issues that the person is coming in with.
Yeah, not only is there nothing wrong, I think it's just really hopeful. It's a hopeful message that if one approach doesn't resonate with you or doesn't work for you, we have others and we have other options for you to choose from. Yeah. Great. It seems like a natural transition to just hear maybe whoever is open to sharing. How do you explain the approaches? The main big ones are ERP or ICBT to your clients, and then maybe there's other ones that you introduce to them as well, or other components. So we can also use that to educate the participants that are here. I think that could be helpful before we dive into the details of what is ICBT.
Are we starting with me here, or who are we starting with?
Really, that would be great, Amy, and whoever else wants to jump in. Maybe I should just continue with the picking you all, so it's not this awkward waiting. Yeah, why don't we go ahead and start with you, Amy?
Yeah, so now that I have this chart that I made, I both sort of hand this chart to my my patients, but also I like to explain verbally a bit about the differences between especially exposure and response prevention and ICBT. Yeah, typically what I say is something like, with exposure and response prevention, the idea is that, and actually like Rich, I sort of tend to emphasize the response prevention part. And I'll say, the idea there is that you're going to be practicing sort of facing the things that you fear without doing the things that you have been doing to keep yourself safe, and that sort of keep you sort of focused on the threat and believing that you have to do them in order to be okay. So it really involves, the combination of facing your fears, exposures, and then intentionally practicing when you're facing your fears, not doing the compulsions. Whereas with inference-based CBT, that's a very different approach where exposures are not actually really a part of the treatment at all. Instead, we're really looking at instead of sort of focusing on the response to the obsessions, we're looking at the obsessions themselves, and how did you get to a place where those obsessions are so scary, where they're coming up for you and they're so scary, looking at the story that behind the obsessions, and helping you both sort of understand the fear that you have that's sort of feeding those stories, and leading you not to trust yourself, and bringing you back to a place where you have trust in yourself and the certainty that you used to have before the obsessional doubts sort of came up. And that's a more cognitive process that doesn't involve exposures.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, Amy, for that really clear explanation. I know you had also dived into RF-ERP, which is rumination-focused ERP, and I feel like that approach with Dr. Michael Greenberg is also pretty revolutionary in that he talks about it's actually small, very small E, big RP.
Exactly.
Where you actually want people to feel zero anxiety when they're just facing these everyday life things that they've been avoiding. Can you share just a little bit more about that and how that's influenced your work with ERP?
Yeah. So that actually, I discovered that before I found inference-based CBT, and I found that the rumination-focused ERP was so helpful for some people who had not responded to traditional exposure and response prevention. And yeah, part of it is this emphasis in rumination-focused ERP and understanding that it's like all this stuff that we're doing in our heads to try to solve the problem or monitor, or all of this rumination that's actually producing, like it's the cause of the anxiety. And so if we can stop doing the ruminating, we don't actually feel anxious. And so exposures actually become an opportunity to practice not ruminating, as well as not doing other compulsions. And when people are able to approach exposures without ruminating, they do discover that actually I can do this. Like, I don't feel anxious when I don't ruminate. And it can be, for people who get it, it's really empowering. I had a number of people who just, after I discovered this, who just got it. And were able to, almost, I was working with many of these people for just a week. And, by day 2, they were able to do these exposures they never would have been okay with, if by day 2, if I'd been doing traditional ERP, because they'd gotten this idea of not ruminating. For other people, I've found it's harder to sort of get that idea, and for them, they need other approaches. Yeah.
Right. So it addresses basically the cognitions first, the obsessive process of ruminating. And then once they learn the tools to stop that, when it works, then exposures are actually pretty easy and restores actually a sense of agency, which he defines agency as doing what you want to do and not doing what you don't want to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I just really liked his example where he said, so if they don't want to touch the toilet and lick their hands, they don't have to do that. They can just go to the restroom, and the exposure is actually just going to the restroom. And response prevention is then if I don't ruminate or I don't engage with that rumination process, then I don't feel the need to continue to compulse through that. So I just think it's a pretty fascinating treatment approach as well that I know you've had a lot of experience in. Thanks for explaining it so well too. Yeah, I am noticing the time as well, and I'm like 3 questions into our 10 questions. So let me pick and choose from our 4 panelists for each of the questions, and it may not be all 4 answering every single question here. I'm wondering, Bronwyn, if you could also share as an ICBT trainer how you also, what you would also add to what Amy had shared, or just maybe your own version of how you give the menu to your clients.
Yeah, what Amy shared was perfect. I like to add a little bit about the difference of how ERP and ICBT look at OCD, because they're very different. Like, it's a very different mindset of what OCD is and how it works. And so often with my clients, I'll explain, we can go the ERP route, and ERP sees OCD as, intrusive thoughts happen to everyone, but with people with OCD, intrusive thought comes in, gets appraised as something bad, scary, and then that's stuck. And then we did end up with compulsions. And so we use exposures and response prevention to help treat that and break that process, that cycle. And then with ICBT, what we're looking at is not intrusive thoughts. What we're looking at is what's called an inference. And people with OCD have totally legit valid logic that has helped inform their reasoning process. And we're not arguing the content there. Like, we know that germs exist, that robberies happen. Those are things that exist in the world, and to ignore that would be silly. But what we work on instead is how are we applying that knowledge in the here and now when it may not fit. And that's where OCD hooks us, is in those moments. And so I talk about working on a faulty reasoning process there instead of having to do any exposures. And if we can unwind the obsessional doubt and getting hooked from that and resolve it, and come back into trusting ourselves, our senses, and our common sense, then the compulsions are not necessary. They don't need to happen anymore.
And what does ICBT say about intrusive thoughts, or the views of that?
ICBT says that everybody has intrusive thoughts, like all humans do. They don't not exist. It's just that's not the real cause of OCD. The cause of OCD is that we're taking logic and we're applying it in here and now where it doesn't belong.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. Katie Marrotte, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name right.
Marrotte, Katie Marrotte. Yeah.
Marrotte. Okay, just kidding. Katie Marrotte.
Close.
She talked about an analogy for ICBT as if you imagine that you're going through a haunted house, but you then turn on all of the lights, so then you can see the mechanisms that initially created these fearful triggers, and you can just see how it all works, and that's breaking down the logic of it all. Then it doesn't seem so scary anymore. And maybe if we could expand on that analogy, maybe ERP is then I go through the haunted house and I keep going through it and I go through it over and over again. Then I realize that, oh, it actually isn't as scary as I thought and it won't harm me.
Right.
But ICBT then actually just turns on all the lights and really allows me to understand the mechanisms of all of those scary things.
Yeah, I like to see ICBT as the how, right? And that was what I was missing in my own journey was how am I getting trapped into these thoughts? Like how are they tricking me into believing them? And ICBT unwinds that process. So you can see it for what it is, and then you get agency back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the how, it's understanding the processes.
Right.
That then gives you even more, for some, it sounds like even more of a sense of healing or agency or understanding of their struggles. The more I dive into it, the more I just see like this approach is just so smart and well thought out and comprehensive in how it explains OCD. And that makes a lot of sense to me, that understanding the hows and the processes really allows for a greater understanding of the self and the struggle, and maybe even a deeper long-term healing. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So now maybe we can dive in a little bit more on what is ICBT and what has been your experiences with treating it for those of you who have applied it to your own self. I'm just sharing a little bit more of the details, and then I think it'll be helpful for me to also share the link from Fred's website for people to start to watch some of those instructional videos. I haven't seen all of them, but I think they're just a wonderful resource that's free, that's very generous. Tell me how to pronounce Fred's last name, Bronwyn.
It's Fred Ardema.
Ardema. Fred Ardema is one of the co-creators of ICBT, and I have seen to be just truly generous in giving out this information so people can just really learn from it. So, yeah, from here, maybe people are still wondering a little bit more about what is ICBT, and if you all can give a little bit more specifics and maybe even cases that you can disguise the personal information, but how you could see it be applied so people can see it, maybe a bit more of a concrete application of that process.
Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so inference-based CBT involves 12 modules, and those are all free to you. They're on Fred's website, which has already been put into the chat. And basically what we're doing is we're walking our clients through how their OCD works. And so you start with teaching them what's called an obsessional sequence. And we're walking them through exactly how that obsessive doubt looks in from beginning to end. When I say beginning, starting with a trigger and ending with a compulsion. So we start there, and then we move into teaching them about their logic. And well, they're teaching us about their logic, right? They're going to tell us about the reasons for why they believe these things, why they believe these obsessive doubts that are popping into their heads. And from there, you're going to help them look at what's the story that OCD is pulling them into. If anybody here has lived experience, you'll be very familiar with the bubble feeling of being pulled into OCD. It feels very alive and very, very real. And so when your clients are telling you, but I truly like this feels so real to me, it's because OCD creates creates this very strong narrative. So we're helping to deconstruct what OCD is doing as we're teaching our clients how to battle against it. And then one of the key points of ICBT is that the obsessions that we get caught up in are based on what's called the vulnerable self theme. And so an example here, I'll just use myself since then I don't have to use any client stuff, but my vulnerable self theme is negligence. Like when I was dealing with OCD, I was very afraid that I was going to become somebody who is negligent. And my kind of framework on OCD now is I don't really look at subtypes anymore. I look at this as negligence OCD or immorality OCD, like what a core fear would be, or potentially with TEAM-CBT, like what's the hidden emotion piece might link here with this vulnerable self thing. What's that key thing that's pulling across subtypes of OCD, relationship OCD, pedophilia OCD? It all comes down to the vulnerable self theme, this one thing or two that OCD is trying to protect your client from becoming. And so when we are able to help our client get down to that level, they can really start to see, oh, this is how my OCD works here with contamination. So for me, I was very fearful that I was going to get my family sick, or that I was going to get sick and that was going to be a burden to them. I had accidental harm OCD. And in that way, my negligence theme played out in, I'm going to leave the door unlocked and my family is going to get murdered, or I'm going to make it so that my sister ends up getting kidnapped and that will be all my fault, right? Or I had a lot of scrupulosity OCD. And I would think, if I didn't do this thing right or pray just correctly, then God was going to punish me. And that was going to punish my family, or God was just going to punish my family against me. Like I was morality wise going to do something wrong, or my compulsions, if I didn't do them correct, then that was going to come down to me. But the way my OCD hooked me was through negligence. And then what we do with that, after we've got that education piece in place, is we teach our clients how to trust their senses again, their common sense, and their real self. And that's through something called reality sensing. And we're teaching our clients then to come back to direct evidence in the here and now, in this moment, and not rely on possibility, because anything's possible. I could be sitting here right now and the floor could drop out from underneath me. And I don't have any signs of that though. And until I have direct evidence, possibility doesn't matter. And then we're going through reestablishing the real self, alternative stories, like OCD story is not the only one, but that's kind of a really brief synopsis of the modules as we go through. And one of the biggest things to help our clients know is that, this is all built up piece by piece over time. And so we really stay with our clients in a spot where they are until they master that skill. And then we're slowly adding these things on. And as we do that, we're deconstructing the OCD. And that's a really powerful thing when they can see behind the magic curtain and see what's really been pulling the strings.
Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the vulnerable self theme and how that's different from the subtypes, which is currently how we categorize OCD?
Right. So the subtypes now we have, several, like contamination, harm, relationship OCD, pedophilia OCD, sexual orientation OCD. And those are all divided out by the types of, like things that we're worried about, right? Germs, or we're worried about harm, or we're worried about being inauthentic in some way. And so that's how our OCD is portrayed to ourselves and the outside world, is through those particular types of fears. But when we really look at it through an ICBT lens, the vulnerable self theme that our client has is what is causing those particular types of obsessions the way they are. So if you have clients with OCD and they have harm OCD, they may have that for different reasons. Some people are having that because they're worried they're going to do something accidental and get somebody hurt. Other people have it because they're worried they're going to become a bad person. And that's going to be, suddenly they're going to have this sudden urge to harm someone, right? Those are very different, but they would fall under the same subtype. But within ICBT, we're looking at them like, what's really the underneath that for you? Let's take that, peel it back and really look at why that particular subtype of OCD is able to hook you. And that comes down to the vulnerable self theme.
And do I understand right, Bronwyn, that like in some of my training through the CTSA as well, that a lot of people with OCD have multiple subtypes? But when you conceptualize it as a vulnerable self theme, it's usually one theme that ties in all of these subtypes and why certain ones pop up for certain people and not others. Do I
Yes.
understand that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, did anyone else, Margaret, Amy, or Rich, want to add to your understanding of ICBT and any other examples that you may have that can help to bring that process to life?
I don't have another example in mind, but I do want to say that the whole process is extremely validating for clients. It's like they feel heard. I worked with people with ERP. I've been working with them for a year, and they had done better, especially with their major themes, but they were still sticking around, still struggling. And then when I introduced ICBT, they're like, oh yeah, this makes so much sense. And it almost feels like some of the shame was reduced from the OCD. Like there was an understanding, and it was so validating. And I hear that from almost all of my clients, how validating the whole process, understanding those reasonings. No, I'm not just crazy. There's a reason, and that reason is logical. It makes sense. And I agree 100% with Bronwyn that it's not, it's a process of exploring and education, and then light bulbs go off. And what I found is often in session 3, session 4, before we even get to reality sensing, before we even get to the intervention, my clients are just not doing their compulsions anymore. They're starting to understand the process, and that's starting to fall away. Now, not with everyone, but with many, they're just coming to me. So I don't have to say it doesn't involve exposure at all, except it's a learning based approach. So you learn first and then you do after, where ERP is a behavior, you change the behavior and the learning occurs next. And so as they're learning, their anxiety is going down. And so, of course, they don't need the compulsion if they're not scared anymore, if they're not feeling guilty anymore, the compulsion's not necessary. By the time we get to reality sensing for many, we're already halfway there. That's so cool.
Yeah, you're saying not only is it validating, but you see that as you uncover new learning, it seems to automatically start to drop the need to do compulsions versus like directly addressing that and forcing response prevention. It seems to just naturally unfold for your clients.
Yeah. With ERP, we'd always start with the response prevention. We'd have a list of compulsions. You need to start working on reducing these. Then we would enter into exposures, and we identify the compulsions, but I never say, okay, how did you do on your compulsions this week? Not at this point. And when we get into modules 8, 7, 8, and 9, we're looking more at, are they applying these tools and helping them learn to reality sense and apply the tools. But often they're just coming to me and saying, hey, I did this week. Can you believe it? And I'm like, yeah, cool. And it was really, as I'm learning it, I'm like blown away that my clients are doing this. I'm only 10 months in to learning it. And it's just so simple in so many ways. It's very complex, but it's so simple in its presentation to clients.
What are those moments like when you see them come back and they just say like, wow, I just naturally dropped these really intense compulsions?
If you join the Facebook group, you'll see therapists all the time because they just feel like I've got to share this with somebody. And I've slowed down on sharing it because I don't want to take up all this space. But one therapist said, would you believe what happened today? It's an amazing feeling. Really is. And when I worked with BDD, I'd never worked with BDD before, and I don't want to get off on that, but that was a really short process of recovery. And that was 6 months ago, and all of those clients are still in recovery from their BDD. Now they have BDD and OCD, but it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is really awesome and amazing to really see the progress happen without almost like a forcing or a white knuckling of response prevention.
Yeah, it's so nice.
Yes. Yeah, that's really awesome. Did Amy or Rich have anything to add to that?
Can you hear
Go ahead,
me?
Amy.
Can you hear me? It's
Um,
Blair. Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay. I'm having trouble with my audio. That's what I'm asking. Yeah, don't misconstrue my lack of participation as lack of interest. I'm new to ICBT, so I'm just absorbing all of this and appreciating all of the comments that are being made. So I'm just listening.
Thank you so much, Blair. We're glad you're here and listening and
Yes.
learning. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, is it okay if I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I had just wanted to sort of add to everything that Bronwyn and Margaret shared to say that sort of one piece that has really been very striking to me in the work with ICBT is a piece that Bronwyn didn't talk so much about. It sort of it's located at the end of the modules, the real self module, where patients are actually looking at, their everyday experiences, what people who know them, the feedback people who know them give them about them, and using those real experiences to get in touch with who they really are, which is always the exact opposite of their vulnerable self or their feared self. I'm still beginning, still a newbie when it comes to ICBT, but in the cases that I've followed through to the end, I've really seen that sort of getting in touch with the real self piece to be so validating and so powerful. Yeah.
I really love that piece too, Amy. And can you share a little bit more about exploring the real self or the true self and how that has created an impact for you and others?
Yeah, it's actually the first person that actually, maybe I'll share my own experiences. So I don't actually have full-blown OCD, but I have some pieces of it, and one of them is this. So I guess my vulnerable self theme is that I will hurt others, and it's actually similar to Bronwyn's in sort of being neglectful and hurt people, making mistakes and hurting people. This is actually something that happened sort of after I learned about ICBT. As I was sort of on my own, I sort of went through the manual, and I was on my own sort of doing the real self exercises, and sort of noticing feedback that other people were giving me about me. At that point, I was in a group where one of the other members of the group, we were sort of discussing my fear of harming people, and she said, Amy, that like you go out of your way to be, kind to people and not hurt them. And I was actually able to hear that and sort of see the incongruity between that vulnerable self theme of mine and what she was saying, and realize she's right. I do go out of my way not to hurt people. And somehow that one moment actually really made a difference for me, and just sort of not buying into that vulnerable self story anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen the same with my patients, where it's been really powerful.
I love that. I love when you can then see the truths about you and hear the truths about you and really, really take it in. And that's when then we're out of the OCD bubble and really grounded in truth and who we are in that process, right? My clients also especially love this process of identifying their vulnerable self-theme. For example, I am a person who could be careless and harm my child. And then when they get to that process of who am I really, as I look at what are my daily actions, what do those attributes show? And then they can uncover that, like, wow, this morning I woke up and I researched how can I help my baby's brain development? What are those really engaging tools that I can do? And then, I greeted my husband, and then I made a really good, healthy meal for my child. And I do all of these other things. And it's the exact opposite of someone who's careless, who could harm my child. There is just something that's so grounding and beautiful about that process of truly seeing the true self versus the story of the self that the OCD tells them. Right? So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up and how important and beautiful that process is for people. Okay, I know there's a lot of great questions in the chat, and at noon I'll allow it to open up to everyone as well. Okay, I just want to touch base a little bit on the hidden emotion treatment model. I feel like the hidden emotion, Michael Greenberg touches on a little bit more about psychodynamic approaches and kind of those deeper fears contributing to anxiety. And it's not even deeper fears, like maybe moments when you couldn't have a voice about something that bothered you, that then can show up as OCD. But nowhere is it really as fleshed out, I think, as in TEAM-CBT, where you could really address the hidden emotion, and it could either really drastically decrease OCD symptoms. And I've even had one case where it eliminated compulsions completely for that person. Do any of you have success stories? Any of you mind first sharing how you would use the hidden emotion to treat OCD? And do you have any success stories about someone exploring, like, oh, this is the true thing that was really bothering me in the here and now, and then it started to create healing for them?
I'll jump in with one case. One of my very first cases when I was an intern many years ago was somebody who found herself fighting with people, when she'd go out with her friends and things like that. She couldn't understand where it was coming from. And in desperation, I did the downward arrow exercise, from TEAM-CBT. And when we got about 5 levels down, why do you fight with people, and what we came up with was, if I don't stand up to these people, I will cease to exist. And I was like, whoa, stop, cut, print. And so what we discovered was that there was a lot of areas where a lack of assertiveness in terms of her relationships, in terms of her romantic relationships and so forth, focusing on assertiveness training really made a huge difference in terms of stopping those behaviors. And in a broader sense, with the hidden emotion technique, where it breaks down for me is that I notice a lot of people with OCD, including a lot of my friends and colleagues with lived experience, we're pleasers. We're people who tend to put our own needs on hold to please other people for fear of being rejected or abandoned, and learning to assert ourselves. And there's mechanics to asserting yourself. It's not just a matter of being braver or standing up for yourself. It's learning to use the right language. It's learning to work with people in ways that get you the outcomes that you want and so forth. That often will make a huge difference in the clinical trajectory.
Yeah, so you're talking about the hidden emotion. It often is tied with people pleasing or avoiding conflict or wanting to be nice. And then when they learn to have a voice about certain aspects, for this client specifically, it was then letting go of, sounds like maybe even like compulsions to fight or to stand up for herself. Once she had the verbal words to assert her needs, she didn't need to do that anymore.
And I find that's a theme with OCD in general. I'm curious about your experience, Tyann, or others in the panel, but when I read about David's hypothesis about the hidden emotion, it feels to me like 80% of the time it breaks down to people pleasing and stuffing your own emotions. I don't know if that's other people's experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that really is the core of the hidden emotion. And the example that I shared was a woman that I shared it on the podcast with David Burns, where she had come in and she talked about the intrusive thoughts was that my baby would get electrocuted. And she said, I know it makes no sense. The baby's in the crib, the cords are under here, but I'm terrified. And every night I'm checking the cords for an hour and a half to make sure there's no breaks in them. And we just started to explore the hidden emotion. It's often I like it as my first go-to, then I realize I don't even need to do ERP or ICBT if it is a hidden emotion, because then for her, she said, we just explore, like, is there anything going on around that time when you really have this urge to do all of these compulsions, when those intrusive thoughts are really strong for you, or those, really scary images are really strong for you? And she said, often it's at night. And she initially didn't know what it was that could be bothering her. Things with her marriage were great, very supportive husband. And so I just left it for her as homework. And then she came back and realized, she said, yeah, around those times at night when I'm really having those scary images and have strong urges to do compulsions, I realize I'm doing all the nighttime care of the baby by myself. And I'm actually truly kind of pissed off at my husband. And he has had good reason to take care of himself and to get more sleep. But she said he's actually doing quite well now, and he can do a little bit more to help. And so we did do motivational work and communication training. She ended up having this really heartfelt conversation with him. And truly mind-blowing for me, I was already planning all of this, like maybe some imaginal exposures, some in vivo exposures and different things. She came back the following week and said, I've had 0 compulsions since talking to my husband. And he came up with a chart on how he can pitch in and help out. And they just had this really connecting resolution. And it was just mind-blowing to me. So I think the hidden emotion is something definitely worth exploring with people. Is there something in the here and now that's just really bothering you that you may not be addressing? It could be a hidden emotion of resentment or anger. Sometimes it's a hidden desire, something I'm really wanting that I feel like I shouldn't, like I actually want to work instead of staying home with the baby. Then it's something really worth exploring. And once you honor your voice and your true wishes, it often helps to alleviate some symptoms, if not eliminate whatever the struggle is for people. Okay, for Rich and Bronwyn, clinicians with lived experience with OCD, what do you feel like has helped you in your healing journey? And whatever you're comfortable with sharing in that process. And I know, Bronwyn, you've already shared some ERP, and then it seemed like ICBT topped it off for you. But feel free to elaborate on any of those pieces.
So ERP, yeah, definitely helped me be able to function and get back into life. I mean, I'd spent years at that point. Probably I was 15 when my OCD really kicked into high gear. And so I happened to just be an undergrad in psychology and came across an ERP lab in my psych building one day, and I was like, ooh, I should try this. So got enrolled in that study. And it was it definitely allowed me to be able to, walk around without my hands in my sleeves, and be able to touch things again, which was fantastic. And then my case is a little bit complicated. I have a lot of trauma as well. So I'm a lived experience clinician with PTSD as well. And that definitely, if you are looking at it through an ICBT lens, you can see how trauma can feed as direct evidence to support that doubt, right? So I actually had to do some trauma treatment as well. And that didn't help me with the OCD necessarily, but it definitely helped me with the trauma pieces. And then ICBT landed in my lap and was just a game changer. There really wasn't opportunities for training or anything at that point. And so myself and Rich and a bunch of our buddies were really kind of walking through it together. So that really took care of a lot of my fear-based things. And Rich mentioned earlier, actually it took care of all my fear-based OCD. Rich mentioned earlier that we talk about being each other's doppelganger. And I would say that Rich has helped me immensely with my Disgust OCD. I owe him a ton. He very much solidified a lot of what I had kind of learned over time about myself, but being able to actually sit down with somebody who really made me feel very understood was a total game changer. And he and another one of my colleagues really gave me the green light to just see myself in a different way when it came to my Disgust OCD. So I owe a lot to Rich.
And I, in turn, have learned a ton from Bronwyn as well. We're both a mutual sharing section, which kind of ties in with my experience in dealing with my own lived experience with OCD. I'd say the single biggest thing for me has been learning to shed the shame in my own struggles with treatment, discovering other clinicians with lived experience who've struggled with the same things I have. Because honestly, clinicians like ourselves are fairly well connected in the field. And sometimes we've seen some, very highly pedigreed therapists who had no idea what to do with us other than the way they'd been trained. And that, however nice they try to be about it, leaves us with a tremendous amount of shame that we're not trying hard enough, that we're not, getting it right. And when we compare experiences and see that we're not alone, that's made a huge difference. The other thing, though, that was really game-changing for me was hooking up with a wonderful ERP therapist who really knew her stuff, who was willing to jiggle the key in the lock with me over a period of months until we found things that worked. And in my case, keeping up with the emerging literature. Would this be a good time for me to sort of mention a little bit about Disgust treatment and how that has been different for us?
I was just thinking of that too, Rich. I thought this was a perfect segue into, can you elaborate a little bit more on what is disgust-based OCD versus fear-based OCD and how the treatment may differ?
I think this is really important for anybody who deals with contamination fears, because there's a growing body of literature that shows that it has two flavors. One is fear-based contamination, which is, I'm worried that I'm going to get sick, or I'm worried that I'm going to have other people get sick. David Burns' example in chapter 9 of the book Feeling Great, for example, is a perfect example of that, where exposure was very effective in overcoming those fears. And the reason for that is that fears habituate. What the literature is showing us is that disgust is a very different emotion and is controlled by a different part of our brain. Fear is controlled by the amygdala, which tries to protect us from danger, whereas disgust is processed in part of your brain known as the insula, which tries to protect us from getting poisoned. And so that's why we avoid noxious substances and poisons and things like that. So if your contamination fears take the form of, I'm worried that I'm going to feel yucky and feel contaminated and that I'm never going to lose this fear. Maybe I won't sleep, for example, because I'm just disgusted by what I'm touching. I'm not worried that I'm going to die from it. I'm not worried that I'm going to harm other people. I just feel gross all the time, and I can't bear to feel that way all the time. Exposure often won't work with that because those fears habituate, those triggers habituate over a time period of months, years, or never, sometimes. And for me, doing exposure therapy with my disgust triggers was like smearing dog poop on everything I owned, trying to get used to it, and then discovering I couldn't. And that's where I was really, really stuck. So what the emerging literature finally taught me is that if you use judicious safety behaviors to make yourself comfortable enough to get a lot of practice in the situations where you get involved with the trigger, as opposed to the trigger itself, then that gives you the ability to have those triggers soften over a long period of time. So I'll give you a quick example of this because I think it's a really important distinction. Let's say you're a new mother, you're disgusted by poop, and it's really hard for you to change your baby. Traditional ERP literally will have you expose yourself to increasing amount of poops. Some books have even suggested smearing some of it on your leg, for example. Whereas I talked to a veterinarian once who was a very experienced veterinary surgeon. People describe veterinary care as a flash flood of poop, for example. She still, after 25 years of experience, would probably not sit in a chair with visible feces on them. But on the other hand, the way it goes for a typical veterinarian or a new mother changing their babies, at first it's horrible. You're wearing gloves, you're washing your hands every 5 minutes. If an accident happens, it's horrible. A month later, you're still uncomfortable, but as you continue to do your job, and wearing those gloves may enable you to do your jobs to get those reps in, to get that practice. That's a huge difference with ERP because under ERP, the idea of using a safety behavior is seen as like giving booze to an alcoholic. It's feeding a compulsion. Whereas with disgust-based fears, what I found personally is that using judicious safety behaviors let me get lots more exposure to the situations I was avoiding, help me do those more often to A, function better, and B, have those triggers soften over a long period of time.
And do you see the disgust decrease through the treatment as you use those judicious safety behaviors so they can just engage with life?
I wrote up a treatment protocol that's being used by a lot of clinicians nowadays for this, and I joke that it solves half my problems in the sense that I now am much more comfortable with situations I avoided that involve those triggers. And in time, I've been able to pull back on some of the safety behaviors and not be freaked out around them. I am still often no less disgusted by the triggers themselves. I have not found the secret handshake to make poop, or in my case, poisonous plants as a use trigger. I haven't found a way that I'm ever going to hug a poisonous plant.
You're not going to embrace the poop. Yeah, thank you for that distinction. So fear-based OCD does habituate, and you see the anxiety decrease over time. Disgust, we're really not aiming to habituate or decrease the feeling of disgust. We're wanting them to, you're going to feel this, it's going to feel gross, but proceed with life anyway, according to the way that you want to live it. Continue to change your baby, continue to be a veterinarian.
You make yourself comfortable enough to do lots of practice. That's the key. One other thing I want to throw in also in terms of emerging literature, there has been some emerging literature in terms of using counter conditioning to make disgust triggers less disgusting. It's early research. The results are modest. They found that counter conditioning often will lower your disgust levels from 4.5 out of 5 to 4 out of 5. But it's a promising area. And if I were putting my money on what's going to help us actually desensitize to disgust triggers, I think, finding better ways to do counter conditioning. I've had some breakthroughs that have been amazing on some of those things where I was able to create a different mental image of something that was disgusting, but that's still a work in progress.
Desensitize some, but not like the drastic habituation with fear-based stuff.
I can share an example of using Rich's stuff for me. Like public pools are never going to be something that I enjoy. Getting into a large bathtub with a bunch of other people just is disgusting to me. I mean, that is just disgusting to me. I don't think I'm ever going to totally embrace that as, oh, that sounds like a good idea. But I'm a mother who loves to watch her children laugh and play. And so can I use some judicious safety behaviors around that to make that something I can still go and do with them? Absolutely. So I may go to the pool at an off big time, right? Like I may not want to be there with 50 people in the pool, but can I do it with 10 people in the pool? Okay, I could do that. So does that mean that I'm going at maybe the time of day where most people would want to go? No, but I can do it around that. Can I then focus on my children laughing and playing, even though the feeling on my body is still going to be like, this is disgusting. That's playing in the background, but then can I shift my attention to the thing that I really am there to enjoy, which is my kids laughing and playing and having that time with them. So it's a little bit of even using some ACT in there of like values-based choice, moving towards my goals in life that are outside, but also allowing myself to jump right in the shower. I'm not going to go hang out. I'm probably not going to eat pizza on the pool deck. Like I'm not going to do that, but I may need to go wash my hands if I'm going to sit and eat, or I may have to take a shower like the second we're out of the pool, and that's okay. There's a little bit of some embracing of maybe some neurodiversity within myself with OCD too, like that I have preferences also. I'm not just a person with OCD, and maybe my preferences lead to being a little bit more restrictive in comparison to a typical population. But I've really learned to just kind of embrace that piece of me also. And so I like to give that to my clients also. My rule of thumb is if you're doing something that's not excessive in your opinion, or it's not distressing to you, then maybe that is just who you are. And that should be okay. That should be allowed.
I'd like to jump in and say that that's been a real gift from Bronwyn to me and other people, is the idea of making reasonable accommodations to live a good life instead of trying to get used to things that are yucky.
Make reasonable accommodations to live a good life. And that's the point. Right. Instead of, I think sometimes there's even shaming of safety behaviors or really discouraging it. Yeah. Okay. So there's two more questions, but the next one, it actually will open up the Q&A for the audience. It was someone that sent in a question, actually. But the one right before that is just wanting a little bit more information on the treatment of comorbid OCD and PTSD. And when you have a client that has both, how would you approach this process?
Is this me again? That's my specialty.
That would be great.
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking the whole time.
And it's great.
This is my love of life here, right here. So if I get a little preachy, I probably will. You know, I see this all the time, that like somebody comes in for trauma work and I also diagnose OCD, or somebody comes in with OCD and, oh, look, there's some trauma. And what the research shows here is that if you treat one, you risk it offsets, right? Like you can see the symptoms of the other one go up. Now, I don't know that I have a totally firm understanding of why that is. I have some guesses, some anecdotal thought processes that, you know, they're trying to keep us safe. Those reactions are trying to keep us safe in ways. And when you take one away, that's taking a piece of safety away and the other one goes up. But my treatment choice, I'm a consultant in training and certified EMDR therapist. So I use EMDR to treat trauma. And I use ICBT primarily to treat OCD. So I'm not using EMDR to necessarily treat OCD, but I am using it to treat what we would say in module 2 of ICBT is the reasoning process that's coming in, pieces that are being pulled in to treating, to give like credence to that obsessional doubt, right? And if if you've still got the past coming into the present, my take is we do have to be able to deal with that as well. There's also evidence that shows that about 82% of people who aren't responding to ERP have some trauma. So maybe there is a reason behind why ERP doesn't always respond to treatment for some people. And maybe that is the reason why I did not. So I think it's important that we look at people as, you know, a more holistic thing. And if you aren't trained in treating trauma, then making sure you have somebody in your world that can do the trauma treatment with you that's also OCD informed is going to be a very good tool to have as well. We don't have to have all the tools ourselves, but we better have people in our lives that also have the tools to help us.
Good point. Do you have a recommendation on treating both at the same time or treating the trauma first before OCD?
I tend to allow my clients to guide me. When I'm doing ICBT, I will have a client that comes in, if they're presenting with, you know, like OCD is really what they're coming in for. I will do the educational portion of ICBT first, so I can hear what's informing their obsessional doubt. And if pieces of trauma come up, then I will offer at that time if they want to go and work on those pieces of trauma before we continue with the rest of the protocol for ICBT. If they're coming in because they're here to do some trauma treatment and I start to hear some OCD, I'll pause treatment at that time and we'll talk about OCD a little bit so that they're informed about what is their reasonable doubt versus what is their PTSD response, so that they're aware, because that's an important piece for them to start to learn, to be able to tell the difference. And we may continue with PTSD treatment first, or we may swing over to doing some OCD stuff first. It just kind of depends on there's some room for clinical judgment and each case is different. But I think it's important and great to have just the tools.
Sounds like flexibility and listening to your client is really important instead of just, always treat trauma first or something else, which I've heard.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, whatever is presenting and making their quality of life go down, that's where I tend to go first, right? Is, you know, what piece of this is causing the biggest issue. And when we have trauma in the background, from an ICBT perspective, OCD can come in and grab that trauma, right? If it's linked to that vulnerable self theme, it's going to grab it and hold on to that. So it does make sense to go and unwind some trauma first and then move forward. But if the quality of life from the OCD is just so intense, sometimes it makes more sense to make sure you've got that down to a manageable level before you open up trauma wounds that are going to increase your stress level. And then guess what? OCD may come in and go, whoop, we're really unsafe now. So let me kick that up.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay, so it is a little bit past noon. We'll have about 25 minutes to open it up for the audience questions, but we did have someone send in a question that was really eager to hear from the panelists. And the question is, I have a client that suffers from paralyzing overthinking about decision making. There's constant anxiety that I see as analysis paralysis, in which there's endless unproductive analyzing that serves what seems like safety behaviors that ultimately is unsuccessful for them on questioning decisions. Am I going to make the right one? Is this a wrong decision? And it just keeps them paralyzed. How would you address this as a presenting problem if the client was coming to you? And anyone can jump in if you feel eager to answer that. Looks like Margaret has a thought.
Yeah, I don't know if I have the full answer, but I would make sure one is OCD if that's what we're treating. I guess people could have paralyzing decision. I would suspect it if it was decision making, and I would want to do the obsessional sequence. What are they worried would happen if they made the wrong decision? And you know, she mentioned the compulsions, but that informs too. But it would follow the same course of action as all other obsessional doubts. You know, you could imagine that a vulnerable self theme would be somebody who just doesn't make good decisions, makes poor decisions, and that causes harm to others, maybe, or that makes them look bad or embarrassed. And really, probably that person is just the opposite. I mean, obviously, if they're spending so much time analyzing the decision, looking at the pros and cons, all of that, they're the type of person who really does take their time with decisions and doesn't. So they're really, you know, the OCD self is telling them one thing, but that's not who they are. And it would really go the same course of treatment, but it would be a process of uncovering, you know, of course, and I don't know if any of us have touched on that, but in modules 1 through 4, we're not arguing with the OCD. We're not telling them, oh no, you would make a good decision. Oh no, it's fine. We're just uncovering all of that. And then they, through the process of exploring, and then they realize when they get to the vulnerable self, no, this is not really who I am. Seems kind of silly. So it would be no different, but I'm sure maybe somebody else has some more things to offer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks so much, Margaret. Any other thoughts on approaches for this suffering person?
Yeah, as Margaret said, sort of, I would first want to sort of understand the context in which this trouble making decisions is coming up. So it that's in part going to inform sort of how I approach it. It might not be OCD. There might be something else going on. I'm thinking of someone I worked with who had who was terrified at the prospect of making any decision, and that was the like there was no other sort of way in which anxiety or OCD was showing up. It was just around decisions, and it turned out we uncovered that sort of when she was faced with a decision, she had this real sense of grief. It felt as if someone had just died. I learned that her mother had died when she was 12 years old. And in the aftermath of that, there had been some really, her father and grandparents had made some decisions that affected her very negatively, some bad decisions. So once we were able to sort of see this connection, because it's sort of like a hidden emotion, when we were able to see this connection between her grief for her mother and decision making, the fear of decision making sort of melted away as we sort of uncovered this. And, you know, if I'd gone on to sort of treat it, you know, with ERP or with inference-based CBT, that would have been a sort of a lot of unnecessary time spent on that. So yeah, so really sort of understanding, you know, what is somebody really afraid of, what other emotions are coming up along with the decision making, just really getting a better sense of all the pieces of that can help direct where you'd go.
Yeah, what an interesting case on exploring even like the root of the fears of the decision. There was some deep grief and some maybe really challenging experiences around hard decisions that were made for her, and kind of like addressing a hidden emotion for this. And once you address that, you may not need any other approaches because that makes sense for them or uncovered this wound that's been around. Yeah. Okay, let me open it up to other people in the audience. I know you all have asked questions throughout this process, but if you still have a burning question, type them in and I'll do my best for us to get in as many as possible for the next 20 minutes. Okay, Sylvie is asking, can you speak a little bit about just right OCD, where someone repeats a task until it feels just right? Anyone on our panelists want to answer that one?
Sylvia, I'm going to post this question in the ICBT group. I've been drafting it for a while. So you'll get to read a little bit more about my thoughts on it there, but I kind of see, Fred and I actually were just talking about this in a consult group last week, that I had brought this question to him through an ICBT lens, like kind of see just right in two different ways, right? There's just right about symmetry, like I need to have these, like there's a possible doubt there, right? Like maybe if these things aren't right, then this bad thing might happen. And then there's just right as in, if I don't do this thing right, which is what you're asking, like if I don't do this thing correctly, then it doesn't feel right. And that part of just right OCD, I see as more of the compulsion end of OCD. We didn't really talk about this, but as another module of ICBT is teaching several tricks that OCD uses to tie into the doubt and really make it feel very alive. And my thought there with this one is that's just another one of OCD's tricks, right? Like you better stay here in this compulsion until it feels just right. You got to stay here and keep going. And nope, now you messed it up. So we got to keep doing it again. And that one, it's an awful, it's an awful one to be in. But if we get to the obsessive doubt, then that compulsion never has to happen. And that's where I try to focus with my clients is if we don't get into the doubt with the compulsion, then we don't have the compulsion to deal with the just right feeling.
Great, thank you. Lisa's asking, I am treating a child with POCD with disgust about the kids' germs getting on them. They worry essentially that they will be judged socially and be discovered as a bad person and are filled with doubt about that. ERP is not working well with this child. Imagery has worked slightly, but where would you go next? Do you all have thoughts on the next steps for this child?
I'll jump in on this because there's been a lot of, and somebody asked a question about this in chat as well. There's been a lot of discussion about how disgust can be not just disgust of physical things like germs, but also about emotional things like, am I a pedophile, and so forth. Mm-hmm. My go-to in situations like this is response prevention. And I want to build on what Amy was talking about earlier. People often think that response prevention and exposure are two sides of the same coin. Exposure, of course, is do things that make you uncomfortable. Response prevention is don't do the compulsions that make you feel better. They're usually different things, in my view. Response prevention is about learning how to function better. I'll give you an example. It's not POCD, and then I'll tie this in with the questioner's question. I had somebody once that had severe scrupulosity. The thought of exposing themselves to thoughts that might make them go to hell was overwhelming for them. But what we focused on was tracking how often they asked for reassurance, which was the behavior that was damaging him and the family, and seeing how much they could reduce it from week to week. That was tremendously effective for them because they found that they were finding their own ways to de-emphasize the compulsion until they were functioning normally. So in the sense of the person who's worried about germs and the tie-in with pedophile OCD, I would look at those areas that you're avoiding because of it and see if there's ways that you can get more practice doing more of the things gradually from week to week that you're avoiding that you want to be doing.
Yeah, so Rich, you're talking about instead of doing imaginal exposures to the things that are really bothering them, it's more of a focus on response prevention. What are you avoiding? And what are things that you can do to basically restore agency and do what you want to do with your life?
Exactly correct. And I want to say I'm not totally opposed to imagery desensitization in some cases like that. I've used it successfully. Some people love the idea of making peace with their worst case scenario. And if they can do that, that's very liberating for them. But that's not everybody. I always ask the client how they feel about that strategy. And then, I follow their lead.
I really love your open-mindedness on that response, because I'm seeing some responses about imaginal exposures to be like, never do it again, it makes no sense. When I have seen some really powerful healing with it, and the client will attribute like, that was actually the thing, the flooding, the imaginal exposure that did it for me. But it's not for everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think the key is ask the client, give them full disclosure of what strategies you're going to use, what their evidence base is, whether it's something that's off label or something that we've done a lot of, and then give them the agency to decide what they want to try next.
There's no all or nothing. Let the client choose what resonates with them. That's a great point. Lynn is asking something I have not heard of. Does anyone use the lifestyle psychiatry approach? I find it works well to reduce, often significantly, the ruminations and obsessions. I'm not familiar with lifestyle psychiatry approach. Is anyone else? Maybe we could all look it up a little bit more, Lynn.
Could I say something briefly about it?
Sure.
There's been many different terms for it, but things everybody probably recommends to clients, like aerobic exercise and getting 8 hours of sleep. Also the whole field of chronotherapy, right? Managing light and dark and rhythms. And just what I've found so often with OCD, there are other comorbid conditions like depression or anxiety or other things. So treating those, what I found is that treating those to remission using the lifestyle psychiatry approach, also, addressing substances and medication side effects, but that treating the comorbid conditions to remission, fully to remission, often also just really reduces the obsessions and ruminations. And then for some people, it totally resolves the OCD. For other folks, it just makes doing the rest of the work so much easier, whether the rest of the work is exposure and response prevention or something else.
Yeah. So you're talking about treating the depression if it's there, which some researchers show, like if clients are really highly depressed where they can't even engage in some of the exposures or even some of the ICBT, it would be really important to treat the depression first. And you're also talking about like that lifestyle stuff on like holistic care with hygiene or exercise or sleep. Do I hear that right, Lynn?
Yeah, pretty much. But even when there's not a comorbid depression or anxiety or bipolar illness, I've found that the attending to those lifestyle factors really helps. So I was curious if any of the other folks on the panel had any experience with that or.
Doesn't sound like it, but we're all eager learners and looking forward to reading up on it a little bit more. Thank you for sharing that. Go ahead, Margaret.
I would just say all of my clients know intuitively if they don't get a good night's sleep, their anxiety, their OCD is going to act up. They, and eating well, not that they always do that or are able to do that, but I think, she makes a very valid point about taking care of yourself in a holistic way to keep those stressors down and your symptoms down for sure. Yeah,
great point. Steve is asking, I would love to hear from the panelists what you feel about the NOCD website and their efficacy. I am a bit ignorant about some of those OCD resources. Are any of you familiar with the NOCD website and its efficacy? Yeah, could you speak a little bit more about that?
I can't really speak to its efficacy, but it's all ERP based from what I've been told. So if you're sending somebody to them, it's going to be for ERP. Rich, what do you know?
Yeah, I was actually involved with them in their very early days, sort of beta testing when it was just an app. And Steve Smith, the person who runs it, a tremendous visionary in the field. I think, one of the biggest problems with OCD treatment has been access to care. There have been so few specialists doing it, and they have done a tremendous job of making it affordable and accessible to people. They're available in every state now. They take insurance. Their rates are very reasonable, and they can often hook you up with little or no waiting time with a therapist. As Bronwyn said, they do focus just on ERP. So in other words, if the straight down Broadway, most popular evidence-based strategy for OCD will work for you, then NOCD is a good choice.
And I'll add that it was the guy who developed it, from what I understand, Rich, had OCD and had a difficult time finding a therapist.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
And that's why he recovered, and he thought, I'm going to help other people. So
he's been very open about his own lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's really awesome that there's just a resource to allow people to have access to evidence-based treatment for their healing that's affordable. What a great resource.
I just wanted to share, I was the one that posted the question, that I'm in Michigan. So when I've had a number of patients, when I've been stuck and I know they need a higher level of care, I've referred them to them and they get in immediately. It is exposure response prevention. A lot of the therapists show a lot of the YouTube and videos of OCD, like if you're afraid of hurricanes and tornadoes and germs, they link them to YouTubes and they work with them. They've been very, very effective with patients. One was dealing with uncertainty and decision making, and they're just very helpful for people that feel that, they need a higher level of care and they take insurance. And I think they have to be licensed in the state that the patient's seeing them. But like Rich said, it's pretty good. If you don't have other providers in the area that so few people know how to treat OCD. And that's where we all get stuck,
Absolutely. I mean, to build on what Steve is saying, they actually published an outcome study recently that had pretty good outcomes on it. My only caveat with NOCD is if you're one of the exceptions, like, me with my disgust-based fears, if ERP doesn't work for you, don't lose heart if that isn't the solution for you. But for the vast majority of OCD sufferers, it's a great intervention. The other thing I'll say about NOCD is that they've had tremendous advocacy. They fund research in pharmaceuticals nowadays for OCD or get involved in that as well. So, no, I'm a big fan of NOCD.
Wouldn't it be nice if they were able then to incorporate this other method that we're talking about, the ICBT,
so cool.
the inference? Wouldn't that be so cool? And then they could have trained therapists to do that as well.
Looking at the people who are on their board, they're pretty much ERP experts and giants in the ERP field. So
right.
I'm not sure if that's in the cards in the near term. But on the other hand, I know the other thing I was going to say is that one thing that just really struck me personally, I was the only person who's been trained in OCD treatment in all of upstate New York for many years. I was the only person who'd been through the IOCDS clinical training. I literally had people driving in to see me from Rochester, Syracuse, Binghamton, in the same week. And I was full of people hanging out the windows. So,
right.
I think that what they've done for access to care has been nothing short of amazing.
Thank you.
Steve, would you mind confirming the website for NOCD? That would be really helpful for all of us to know.
I think it's here. I think it's NOCD.com, but I could double check.
Treatmyocd.com.
Treatmyocd.com. Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing about that. Rabbi Joel is asking, I'm not hearing much about ACT. Is there any experience using ACT, particularly techniques of diffusion for treating OCD? I heard Bronwyn touch base on it a bit, on just still like proceeding with life, these, committed actions that are tied to my values seems really important, especially for like the sensations. It seems like disgust that won't habituate. How do I live with it and sit with it in my body and move forward anyway? So that's more of the action piece, but how about the diffusion part is the question.
I think there's two flavors of ACT. I'm a fan of both of them. One, and you framed that very well, Tyann. One is where you're essentially following your values, and diffusion is a good strategy for tolerating the distress. Flavor number one of ACT is where you follow the things that represent your values as opposed to seeking exposure for its own sake, and tolerate the distress that comes with that. And that's where diffusion comes in as a valuable strategy. In my case, I use ACT, the sort of small a, in a sense. I'm not asking them to tolerate distress. I'm asking them to make themselves comfortable enough to do lots of practice. And that's kind of the pure ACT, where you're seeking accommodations that allow you to follow your values and do more of what you want to be doing. And I think both have a place, and depending on the treatment matrix of the person in front of you.
Yes, great. Any other answers to that on ACT for OCD? Okay. Are there any other burning questions for our panelists here? Okay, EB is asking, has anyone heard of James Cantor's research on pedophilia? I have not, but I'm learning different things just from the comments and the questions here as well.
Is it okay to, can I say something on it? Or
yeah, go ahead.
First of all, it's good to see you. I love Tyann.
Great to see you too.
Your meetings are awesome. So it's basically, so he's a scientist in the University of Canada, and he's a little bit controversial. He does like a lot of sex research and stuff like that. There's some things that he writes about, like gender dysphoria and things like that. But like the research that he did related to pedophilia, there's actually a film on Netflix called I, Pedophile, and it's essentially like pedophilia. Essentially they view it as like an orientation, meaning so like when you're young, like around 5 years old, you're attracted to other 5-year-olds, but then when you're 7, you're still attracted to 5-year-olds, and when you're 10, you're still attracted to 5-year-olds. Like it's pedophilia is basically like something that happens in the brain. It's not like all of a sudden you're attracted to children one day or want to do something. So they came up with this like entire community called Righteous Pedophile, and there are all these forums and like these like pedophiles like talking to each other and saying like, yeah, I know that I'm attracted to children and I know that this is wrong, but like I'm not going to like go and pursue this and actually do harm to children because like I don't want to hurt other people. So I know that with OCD, like the problem we'll probably get is like, yeah, but what if I was attracted at 5 and don't remember or something like that? But and then you deal with that, more like OCD. But sometimes I like to give that piece of psych ed because they do a lot of like they did like a lot of like MRI scans and research and things like that, and it was a pretty big documentary. So I think I know that the goal is not to provide certainty, but I think that sometimes hearing that information is helpful to people who kind of like are really like obsessed about like the what if part. So I wanted to share that.
Tyann, look, I know we're almost out of time, but the DSM actually lists pedophilia as a sexual orientation, and then in the next revision they're thinking about taking that out because it's caused some controversy. But I learned exactly what you're talking about from a client with POCD, using that as an argument that he may be sexually oriented towards children. Of course he wasn't, but it's really interesting. I'm going to check out the Netflix. So.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit more to what's the difference between someone who has legitimately had pedophilia and you see it? And I know pedophilia has such a negative just like judgment in our society, but my belief is, and the research shows, that you really can't control what you feel attracted to. And there is a whole group of there are pedophiles who are non-offending, who would never, ever hurt a child. But how are they still different? Because they can also look at their history and see like, oh, I've never hurt a child and I never will, but I do find them sexually attractive. How are they different from someone suffering from POCD?
Do you want to
Yeah.
answer that?
Yeah, I'll try. I'm not like the big expert in it, but I think the idea is like, if you're, you have a sense like, hey, when I was like 6, like, did I like other 6-year-olds? And then when I was like 12, did I only like 6-year-olds? You know what I'm saying? Like, so, for people with like very, very, very severe, where they're like questioning literally everything, what they had for breakfast or, what, like, yeah, then you kind of deal with it more the obsessional route. But like, the idea is even with like HOCD, for example, right? Like you have like the groinals, right? So you think, oh, like, am I? And then the anxiety itself creates the same, feeling that the physiological sensations of attraction create, right? And so then you kind of, I guess, start questioning like, well, all of a sudden, like, am I a pedophile? But so you could still get the groinals, which come with HOCD, but the idea is that, if you're dealing with someone who's, somewhat reasonable and, it varies with regards to the OCD, and this is not a judgment at all by any means. I've had all the OCD second, but like, it's essentially, it's saying like, what, can you, it's saying like, hey, this is a specific, orientation. And of course it's, I don't like using the word orientation, and I hope it doesn't, get categorized like that. That would be awful, but for lack of a better word, it, it is what it is. So, essentially from the research so far anyway. So, at least that's my view of it. So I think, just saying like, hey, do you remember being, 6 years, kind of just saying like, hey, this is what happens. It's like it's something that you would have recognized sort of thing. I think I've had like a couple clients that I've given that psychoed to, and was almost like, oh, okay, cool. So, that's my take on it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And wrapping up with a really interesting topic on groinal responses. And but yeah, I liked Bronwyn's elaboration on it, that maybe with pedophilia, there's a certainty that they are attracted to children. And then with POCD, there's a doubt, I might be. Could I be? And there's this analyzing response. I think Fred also gave a great elaboration on groinal responses and using that to justify their OCD. Like if it's true pedophilia, that groinal response will come with the stimuli. When it's POCD, it only comes after you start thinking about sex and analyzing, is this, and trying to look at those different stimuli. So it actually didn't come first. It came after the obsessional doubt and trying to figure it out and then engaging with all of that. So, okay, but it is 12:32. So I just want to thank everyone for being here and all of your great questions, but a really special thanks to our 4 panelists and just truly your heart and passion for this work. Everyone is truly a kindred spirit who just really cares about helping the people sitting in front of us get the healing that they're looking for. So thank you so much for all of your time and the education that you've provided us. I'll send you all additional links for additional training. And Bronwyn is, as you can see, brilliant and very kind, and giving that training in December. So that will be a great one to learn from. Thank you so much, everyone.